All right, everyone. It's noon Eastern time, so we'll kick it off. Thank you, everyone, for joining today's webinar. Title of the webinar: This is not your father's demand response or demand flexibility. We have a great roster of contributors today, so we're quickly going to fly through the introductions and topic overview so that we get right into the discussion as quick as possible. Our plan is to leave about 15 minutes at the end for Q&A, so please feel free to start populating the chat with questions that will accumulate throughout the session, and we'll get to them at the end. Otherwise, we'll also open the floor for live questions at that point. Quick introduction of today's panelists. I'll go in alphabetical order, more or less. So Doug Arendt, Executive Director, Strategic Public-Private Partnership at NREL. Thank you, Doug. Dr. Francois Bouffard, Associate Professor and Williams Scholar at McGill University. Ahmed Hanafi, Partner at Dunsky Energy and Climate Advisors. Hisham Omara, VP Grid Modernization at Electra. And on the BrainBox side, Nicolas Bosset, our Chief Energy Transition Officer, and myself, CEO of BrainBox AI. So want to thank everyone for joining us today. We have a great panel, and we'd like to take full advantage of this discussion. Demand response has been around for a couple of decades at least. People will point to it earlier than that. But the market penetration has been pretty limited, and it feels like up until now it's been a nice-to-have category of solution. But a number of trends that some of them have been in motion for a couple of years now at a minimum, but these trends are pushing towards demand response being in the must-have category. These are growth of intermittent renewables, electric vehicle adoption, electrification of everything trend, and now in the last, call it 18 months or really 12 months, to put the icing on the cake here, the unexpected explosive demand for compute power, and therefore the real fast-growing number of data centers globally that people are forecasting will speed up more than it is going today, even. So energy efficiency, better grid management, grid modernization, and the demand flexibility that needs to be wrapped around it is now hitting us very quickly. And so today's goal is basically to have the panelists chime in, and we've suggested we make this like a real lively discussion back and forth. Expect disagreements or differing opinions here, but basically to cover how demand response is changing in terms of new technology available and what conditions are needed for it to scale more so than it has been over the last 2 decades. And so we'll jump right into it, and I'll kick off the discussion by basically asking the group here, what do you think has prevented a broader market adoption of traditional demand response services up until this point here? So I'm opening up the floor to the first volunteer.
Well, I can maybe jump in. I'm the academic here, so I don't really have full freedom of speech. I will say it's because the utility industry is highly conservative, and they see demand as something they have no command and control over. And clearly now, yes, the context has changed dramatically. And even, I remember working on a project about 6 years ago in Europe, and you spoke to the French, you spoke to the Italians, you spoke to the Spanish. They all had different approaches to the exact same problem. And the idea of letting go of some control or being very much a command and control approach was a real big stop for all of this. But I think now we have no choice. So I think the rest of the panel are probably in agreement with that statement that we need to move fast. We need to move forward very, very quickly.
Yeah, just to jump in here, the second that I have the pleasure of working with utilities that are across the U.S. and Canada on the bleeding edge of things, and some that are a bit more conservative. And I can tell you with absolute certainty, it's certainly not a technical constraint they're facing. I think it's in many cases a market constraint, an enablement constraint because of the antiquated regulatory systems or frameworks that we operate within. In some cases, antiquated planning and just ways of approaching the problem. And although demand response isn't new, demand response for a couple of decades now. I think what's raising the alarm bells is you all just alluded, is the massive influx of load growth that we're seeing, where we just can't build traditional resources, whether it's golden wire, fast enough. And so demand response is moving from this afterthought resource, or afterthought, I should say, load modifier, to an actual resource class that we're tapping into, that can be built, can be scaled to meet emerging grid needs, whether in generation needs, resource adequacy needs, ancillary service needs, energy needs, whatever emerging needs we have, even down to the distribution system. This emerging resource is well geared to address an emerging problem. And I think we're this certainly an inflection point, just because we need everything in the kitchen sink to be able to address that massive influx of load growth after a couple of decades of near zero, or even in some cases declining growth.
Yeah, if I may, Sam, so it's a complementary comment that I think is important. I think that those last comments are really important. The regulatory construct has evolved very slowly. I think it's important for folks to recognize that construct was put in place for utilities to meet demand at all times with reliable, affordable power, which meant there was no motivation, frankly, no recognition that demand response was possibly an economic valuable solution. That, of course, has changed over time, but it's been limited to a pretty considerable, I'll call it, market participants, i.e., think of bulk players who could orient and shift demand or lessen demand. And there was a remuneration mechanism starting to be put in place. I think the last 10 years have opened up a very considerable recognition that there are thousands, if not millions, of sources of demand response or flexibility, and that creative businesses and a regulatory construct that enables those businesses to unleash that is a value add to the whole utility system and the customers. And that's a paradigm shift. Now, not all regulators are there, and so that it's still a hodgepodge of regulation in different provinces or different states. For 2222 in the U.S. is a federal order, but that has yet to be implemented, broadly across the different RTOs, et cetera. So, a recognition of the term was quite good, technical potential, and yet still a lot of work to be done to unleash that.
Yeah, and maybe if I can jump in last and probably summarize what I think the issue we're facing is. I mean, the transforming grid is actually two things. One is the energy transition, and as we mentioned, it's the intermittency, decentralization of the grid, but also it's the grid economy, the green economy, which needs load growth. And globally, I mean, we're looking at doubling the size of the electrical grid. So it's not a local thing; it's a global trend. So what it means is that it creates a massive pressure on existing infrastructure, and there's also a huge need for more infrastructure, and it threats the cost of the system, the reliability of the system, and it creates most likely a lot of congestions. All boils down to cost to consumers. And so bottom line is that we have to maximize existing infrastructure and not like have this knee-jerk reaction of always piling up and having new infrastructure. And it kind of goes to the point of Isham. We need to have scalable solutions to have non-emitting resources that are able to balance. And it all boils down at the end of the day is how to find a cost-effective replacement of natural gas resources. And that is the challenge we're facing, and we need to adapt the markets, adapt the regulations, so that we're able to tackle this really big issues that we're facing.
Is there I permit myself to ask the outsider questions. I'm the outsider of the industry here. Is there not enough pressure on the grids, let's say, or the various regions to cause movement alone? Like, I mean, I know it's probably a bit utopic thinking here to say that people just do the right thing without the financial motivations, but is there not enough pressure being felt in the various grids to cause movement down this path on its own?
I guess to answer your question, Sam, I think the pressure comes from exactly what we're just talking about, the fact that we're at this inflection point where, I'm working with utility clients who have substations reaching their rated capacity and they just can't get transformers on the ground fast enough. We're looking at places where, I'm based in Quebec. The Quebec's interconnection queue, after years of surplus and years of just free for all, you can come here and we'll give you whatever you need. There's a huge constraint on the grid, and they're having to make some hard choices about who gets a interconnection, who doesn't. So I think the nice thing is this resource offers cost-effective alternative. So it's a cost-effective compared to the counterfactual building, whether it's power plants or poles and wires. It's right sized. There is very little to no risk of overbuild, of burdening ratepayers with undue investments, and it's quick to deploy. It takes again 5, 6, 7 years right now to be able to deploy some of these other assets. You can scale up a DER program in a year. There's an example in Ontario that I reference quite often with the Peak Perks program that was launched, target residential smart thermostats, an area that traditionally has been left off by aggregators. And the system operator in Ontario launched a program that was able in the span of months to sign. I don't know the latest number off the top of my head. Maybe Hisham would. It's like hundreds of thousands of customers that collectively make a couple hundred megawatts of contributions to Ontario's energy system that wouldn't have been built, no matter what you're deploying, no matter what you're procuring, in that less than a year.
And I'd add to this that it's eons cheaper also than installing storage, because you'll have the storage, the batteries. People who sell batteries or storage systems will say, well, install a storage system as a way to decongest your substation transformer, but the customers are already there. Construction, as Ahmed just mentioned, the construction costs are next to nothing, and at the same time, there are no safety hazards. So clearly, demand response is a true low-hanging fruit across the board, and it's across the demand chain too, from residential all the way to large industrials. So clearly, we need to be a bit more proactive at milking it. But I understand at the same time there's a lot of uncertainty with respect to that. And how do you manage the uncertainties, perhaps where science, technology, or innovation needs to come in to help developers, utilities, and clients to see this not as some kind of big event.
To me, there's a real reliability issue that is bubbling up, in my opinion. That is related to the decentralization of the grid and the DERs. As Hisham mentioned, those DERs are interconnected at the distribution level. But what we're talking about, the markets are structured at the wholesale level, and there's a huge disconnect between the power flows that system operator that operates at the level have no vision whatsoever what's going on at the distribution level. So there's a fundamental issue that is, at least in North American markets, and there's this great divide between the transmission and distribution systems, which down the road is likely to create a massive reliability issue and probably incur way too much cost for the customers. Like Europe, they are trying to tackle this thing by having TSOs and DSOs to tackle this issue, and also to have compensation for local DERs and demand response to solve local issues. At least to my knowledge, this concept of compensation for local resources is not into play in the US, and it's likely to create like a dent into the adoption and the proliferation of the DER and demand response in those markets. and creates more cost to be borne by the customer instead of maximizing existing resources and or low cost distribution interconnected resources.
Sorry, Sam, let me chime in there. If I heard correctly, just let me put a couple examples out about demand response and DER, distributed energy resource integration in the US. So the US is a very heterogeneous market. Hopefully folks know that there's more than 1,000 serving entities at the load serving level. Some of them are IOUs, integrated investor-owned utilities. Some of them are co-ops. Some of them are public power authorities like a municipality and others. But we're working with examples that could be on the bleeding edge of DER integration. So look at Holy Cross Co-op, which serves Aspen, Vale, et cetera, run by a guy named Brian Hannigan, who used to be at EPRI, used to be at NREL, and is now the CEO up there. He's propagating throughout his system smart homes, smart communities, integration of photovoltaics, batteries, EV charging, controllable hot water heaters, controllable thermostats, and he's got approval from his board to actually balance sheet finance those assets and move them on to their customers through a bill on their through a charge on their bill, and he can do that because then he doesn't have to procure any new power out of the wholesale markets. It's cheaper for him to do that, and he's got more reliability and more control. That's on the small side. On the big side, you've got companies like or organizations all the way up to PJM or Pacific Gas and Electric or Portland General, who are all realizing at least 10, if not 20% of peak demand flexibility through aggregation programs. And then you've got the extreme case where in the CAISO, for example, when they were looking at a reliability event, they frankly sent out a public text to millions of customers and asked them to turn off their loads to save the grid from going down. And that actually happened. There was a positive response. So I think there's a whole plethora of approaches. I think we're talking about more business model approaches than emergency events, but I think the emergency events can inform the fact that people are sensitive to this and they're willing to participate if they get a good value proposition from a company to do that. Doesn't need to be their utility, could be an intermediary as well. So
I think to kind of pull on that string, I think that's the key part here, like the value proposition, and there has to be an economic value for customers. But utilities will struggle to animate that if the regulatory framework does not enable it. We have to be able to kind of capture that value ourselves, have the tool sets to do so, and be able to not only recover that, but actually make that actually a rate of return for ourselves as a utility. And I think that's a missing part of the equation. I think, and again, this applies whether we're looking at a distribution service or a bulk level service or a third-party service. There has to be an element of capturing those costs effectively, clearly, and in an auditable manner, and at the same time reflect that in not only just a cost recovery component, but also at the same time an ability for utilities to make money off of this, similar to how they make money off building poles and wires. I think that's really a key to the heart of it. And I think we're not moving forward. And the reason why there's a level of urgency here is it takes us about 10 to 15 years to plan and implement any project to meet system demand. So for systems that we're looking at for demand in 2035, 2040, we're starting that planning process now and today. So if we don't have the regulatory frameworks today to enable this, we are not going to see the uptake of DERs outside of small kind of incentive-led projects or pilots that don't go to full scale because we're not having the tool sets and the capabilities here and now. And I think the necessary to kind of understand something, if our planning teams don't have the right incentives and tools to plan for them, they're never going to materialize. And that's really at the heart of it. If the planning folks don't get those incentives in place correctly, don't understand the economics, and the money does not line up for the utility, they will never plan for it. They won't even consider it as a solution. And they'll just move ahead with the tried and tested approach of poles and wires.
Yeah, and not to add more challenges to the mix here, but I think there's another layer that's important to keep in mind, which is it's not just the utility incentives that are often misaligned. It's often the different stakeholders in the entire supply chain that are also misaligned. Like I think about markets where again distribution utilities like yourself, Hisham, are trying to procure DERs for local system benefits. Again, assume that the world is great and you have the regulatory models to enable that to happen, but like there is that incentive that may misalign with or have a disconnect with system operators trying to do bulk system optimization for their own purposes and versus customer that's trying to do this for their own economics and for their own bill savings and demand management. So I think one of the things that I'm starting to see and I foresee the next wave of challenges is how do we have that kind of coordinated planning and control of these resources, because there's so many different actors and stakeholders involved, all that want a specific piece of the pie that addresses their specific problem, but the true value of this resource is unlocked when we can all extract that value. So how that coordination happens from an incentives perspective, from a procurement perspective, from a planning perspective, I think is the big challenge that we're going to have to overcome as well.
Yeah, like there was Doug used the term heterogeneous market for the U.S. You look at a country like the U.K. That has a more advanced system, but I guess a less complex or less heterogeneous situation. Do the folks here feel that we need to have more commonality? Let's say take the U.S. as the prime extreme example. You have FERC 2222 at the top. Not sure it has really kind of bubbled down into consistency below it within the regions. Is that required, or is it just good enough that within a region there's an operating platform with the right incentives in place that as per Hisham's comment, that incentivizes the various players in that region to behave in that certain way and get adoption of?
Maybe can I peek on that a bit? Just there, I think if you look at the UK model, they didn't start with the need of doing DERs and DSO. They started with the need of lowering customer costs, ensuring that utilities are cost effective, and getting rewarded for innovation, savings, and outcomes. And then as a consequence, the markets for DERs and all that kind of came about. So they put the cart before the horse. We're doing the opposite here. I think we're jumping into trying to do DERs and trying to incentivize them and not really getting to the head of the fact that it should be about outcomes. And if DERs are suited to achieve those outcomes, so be it. If there's other mechanisms, so be it. And I think we need to kind of start from that onset. The objective should be about finding the most cost-effective way of serving customers. We should not bias towards a specific technology. The utility should be rewarded for innovations and cost savings. And you're going to see the proliferation of DERs as a consequence, because in some instances, they are the most cost-effective solution.
And the issue, I think, maybe you don't know, and you kind of raised the thing is the jurisdiction. In the US, the wholesale market is regulated by FERC at the federal level. And every single state, they have the right to do whatever they want at the DSO level, distribution level. The markets that are the most efficient in the US are those that are single state markets, like New York, California. And the UK is that example as well. There's, without entering into politics of the UK, there's less friction on the jurisdictional front from the wholesale market and the distribution market. So they have an easier way to unify the entire value chain of the electrical system and the grid, the gas system, as a matter of fact. So the issue you're raising is a fundamental issue into the energy markets in the US and in general, is this distinction, jurisdictional distinction between the wholesale market and the distribution market, which creates another layer of fundamental issues to optimize this overall problem that we're facing at the moment.
Do you agree, Doug? Yeah.
No, actually, I was gonna take us in a solutions direction. So we've had a lot of conversation about challenges and things like that, and what's needed to have a business model, the value proposition, make money, etc. So the comment on, you've got to put plans in place and have a vision. So I think a good example of this, not only what I mentioned with Brian Hannigan and Holy Cross, what he's doing as a load serving entity, But the whole program that was put in place in New York, so the mention of New York as an example market, gentleman, good friend of mine, Richard Kaufman, who is the energy kind of grandfather in New York over NYSERDA and the Green Bank, was also the visionary behind what was called the REV program, Reinventing the Energy Vision for New York, where its signature activities was to move utilities to procure what terms he used was a non-wires alternative. Was how does one bring forward the ability to optimally manage the power system for reliable, affordable, low carbon power, and frankly, do it cheaper than building generation and transmission. And through that progress, so that was a vision that got implemented in a number of different programs and procurements of non-wires alternatives projects, which included demand aggregation, DER flexibility. It also included local solutions to relieve congestion and other pieces which weren't big generation and transmission. So it's an example where it takes, I'll call it a bold leader, to come forward with an idea, to put programs in place, to put policy and regulation in place that actually unleashes this idea that, these creative solutions, that's everything from DERs to flexibility that's realized through demand aggregation and management, and do it with businesses that are making money. And so it's a really good example that I think has adoption capabilities, in many, many, many different markets, but it is a process that has to be gone through. And so on the solution side, there's for 2222, again, needs to be implemented, lots of different opportunities to move forward. And so.
Is that like where should this leader sit? Where does this leader come from to make that happen? And is it really market dependent in terms of the tools this person has?
Well, I think the leader depends on the market structure, right? So the leader could be the CEO of a co-op. The leader could be a mayor of a city that's overseeing or has authority over a public power distribution company. It could be the leader of an IOU, but that's in coordination. That's a very complicated stakeholder community, right? That's got to be some coordination mechanism with a regulator, et cetera. Could be a stakeholder group that comes together. So, it could be a business that wants to offer an opportunity and is seeing barriers, but isn't just going in and saying, here, buy my stuff. It's saying, here is a social good value that I can bring private enterprise to, right? Because the utility and the power is in most markets a public good in some sense, right? Public infrastructure, there's a regulatory construct in place, et cetera, et cetera. And so that leadership can come from lots of different places. It's easiest when it comes from, in some sense, political power leadership, but I think it can come out from elsewhere as well.
I guess if I may ask to the industrial people here, how do you scale up though? One thing that I'm involved a lot in IEEE standardization activities, and we have lots of standards for transformers, switchgear, also to P&D bits, but demand response is actually kind of an orphan in that area. Would you see standardization as something that's critical to scale up? And how do you scale up beyond what Doug is saying, these inspirational characters or organizations that come with this idea of let's go, let's do it, and let's get social good out of it?
I think you need to standardize across a number of factors. I think the first one is kind of alluded to market. So what are the market structures that are going to enable this? standards around how you quantify value and be able to animate value, and for utilities to capture value, that has to be elements of standardization and capturing that. So not every utility is left basically to the idea of, hey, submit something to the rate application and fingers crossed you get something because your incentive model works or it doesn't work. There has to be an element of standardization around that. Now, from a technical point of view, there has to be standardization around data structures, how data is being communicated, what kind of data it actually is, how it fits within the wider market, and control and capabilities. I think there has to be standardization around communication protocols, and not only communication for the DR. It has to be communication between the DR, the system operator, whether it's a system operator as in the ISO or the DSO as well. So there has to be elements around that as well. And there has to be mechanisms around measurement and verification, and also as well as pricing. So there's all of those kind of things. Are we doing an LMP plus D, a DLMP? Are there price takers, price givers? There's a lot of that has to be kind of formulated. But I think what's really important, it seems there's a lot, but I think the sector needs to say, look, we have an end goal by a specific date, 2030. Here's the roadmap of how we're going to achieve it, and here's the missing components and how we're going to complete that. And a good example, if you look at the UK, I know we're picking on the UK quite a bit here, but they're quite progressive. They had the Open Networks project. It was so detailed in what was missing and what has to be achieved and when we're going to achieve it by. And that wasn't read by the regulator, it was read by the association on behalf of the LDCs or the distribution companies over there. So the sector does not necessarily have to wait for the government to do something. I think the sector needs to say, listen, here's our end goal, and here's our roadmap, here's what's missing from the government, we're looking to engage them, here's what's missing on our side, and this is how we're going to complete it. And I think by doing so, it sets an ambitious framework and forces the government and regulators to respond to that.
Yeah, and I think the standardization approach is obviously like an ideal outcome, but I would argue it's pretty hard to get there. This comment's gonna get me in trouble, but I'll say it anyways. I have the privilege of being able to work with utilities across the entire country, the US and Canada, and everyone thinks they're unique, right? Like you talk to people in California, like, well, we're California, we're different. You talk to people in Ontario, they're like, we're Ontario, we're different. And there are nuances to each market. I think that is fair. But that mentality, I think, often supersedes the standardization conversation. So, it's already hard to standardize within, as a jurisdiction where you have 5 different load-serving entities that have to harmonize their procurement models or pricing models or interconnection processes or whatever it is. So getting homogeneity across the country or across the continent in this case, I think is a pipe dream from my perspective. But I think what we can do is learn from each other's lessons, right? So, we talked about FERC 2022. That's obviously a mechanism that has some sort of universal, standing, but also, everyone's trying it on with their own flavor. I think where we haven't seen that kind of standardization or cross-learning happen is on things like rate design, on procurements through programs, on procurements in general. I've spoken to vendors that have to compete in neighboring states and, isolating into the market for local, non-wire alternative type of approaches. And the RFPs from utility X and utility Y are so different in terms of requirements or demands. And I'm not sure that there's a natural way to harmonize that, because they're just two utilities that have jurisdiction over their systems. But there may be a role for that standardization from an industry knowledge sharing perspective. But I unfortunately or fortunately, depending on how you see it, no one has that kind of overarching responsibility for applying that standard. So I think people are looking for the NRELs of the world to offer their thought leadership, the industry to come together and cross collaborate and share learning. Some of the IEEE standard setting bodies as ways to harmonize that. But the reality is that we're all trying to chirp at this in our own way, and I think that is part of the problem. But unfortunately, to go into solution mode is that pushed us there. I'm not sure there's at least from my perspective, I'm not seeing a clear-cut solution beyond that kind of kumbaya, let's come together and figure it out.
What I kind of asked this question before, but at what level does that consistency need to happen across the large country, let's say like the US, right? Why the need to have a standard platform? The adoption on the actual resource side, the millions and millions of folks that you want to sign up, Or is it because eventually we're going to increase the interoperability between major grids, et cetera? Like what is the need to make it consistent across the grids?
Well, I would say it's more from the vendors, people proposing solutions, at least getting some economies of scale. You want to have a solution that will fit as many customers as possible. That was my take on that. It's really, again, or having different platforms from different vendors being able to talk to each other. I was talking to folks from Hydro-Quebec yesterday, and they're talking about the rollout of their second generation of smart meters, and they're still stuck in that, the closed model. They have to, do business with that particular vendor or those vendors to be able to communicate. So, and all the vendors in that industry, that segment, they're all proprietary communication protocols. So you always have to have a gateway to interface with other pieces of equipment. If you were able, for example, to make do of the gateway, perhaps the technology ecosystem to propose solutions to customers might actually be able to flourish faster. That's basically the essence of my comment. I don't think, going back to Ahmed's and Doug's point, we're very different here in Quebec than folks in California or Texas, definitely. And the market structures are completely different. So clearly we'll need different approaches, different solutions.
Yeah, I think it boils down to the price formation and incentives to participate. One thing that is clear, and I agree with Ishan, that we need to have like a long-term plan, and we need to sit down and really understand what it means from a resource perspective, demand and supply balance. The thing is that most of the resources that are getting online are price takers, and they are creating negative prices in the market. So that is, and also the products that will need to be procured today, it's like capacity energy. Down the road is likely to be more like ancillary services. So you need to plan for resources that have those capability, that are compensated to be online at the right size and the right location. So that's the real challenge. I mean, first and foremost, we need to have this view on long-term view on supply and demand balance. But then is how these resources are to participate into the market. How are they incented to play ball, and how are they compensated? These are like very complex issues, and we need to project ourselves in the future. Which is not a simple task. So uniformity is really key, but I think it's almost a utopia in the US, for example. It's been very, very challenging to have that.
Yeah, so maybe to move the conversation to somewhere more productive, or arguably this is not going to happen interprovincial or inter-state, I guess. I think the big challenge that we can fix is the intra-jurisdiction, right? So again, I look at jurisdictions that are just the pure state of offerings for DR customers, and DR customers are overwhelming and confusing that people are just not acting, right? We have markets where, again, there's programs that the utilities offering for non-wired alternatives. There's a procure, there's a an aggregator knocking on your door to get you signed up for a capacity market product. There is a rate design or time of use rate that's being offered by your utility. There is net metering and meter type tariffs that are being offered to compensate you for solar and storage. There's a lot of different procurement options, which I think is at face value you can say it's a good menu of options for customers to choose from what works for them, but it also creates that confusion because people just don't know where to go and how to get the best back out of their buck more from the customer perspective. So I think this is where that kind of intra-state, intra-province coordination is critical, because the utility, the regulator, the system operator, the aggregators, have to be aligned on what are the price signals, what are the programs that we're putting into place, and who goes through what. Even if there's a menu of options that people can self-select, it has to be that balance of having choices but not overwhelming people where the state of paralysis, essentially. They just don't act upon their those pathways to begin with.
So Sam, maybe just a super quick comment here. I think you started this thread of conversation about the importance of standards in a platform, and then it moved on. So maybe a couple just reflections. One, electrons move the same in every market. The physics are the physics. That's really important, and I would say that the conversation of, in fact, the policy, regulatory, business environment. And so the value of a platform, in fact, is how do you access and take advantage of the connectivity to the DER elements? That's a technology layer, right? So you think of a software business stack, that platform where you have a really solid technology layer that's very uniform and a platform that's adaptive to the different assets that are in every given market, because they're all different, right? And then on top of that, you have to have a software stack that's frankly plug and play that needs to be adopted to assure a value proposition to a set of customers within a given market construct. And so that's the adaptation of that platform to the policy and regulatory environment that is the interface between the customers, the business making money, and of course what the regulators have put in place. So I think that's an important element, I think, for folks to keep in mind in terms of scalable solutions.
The title of this webinar was pointing towards, is there something changing on the availability of new technologies that maybe solves some of these issues in and of itself? There's a good mix here, right? Utility, research lab, academia. Have you guys seen trends that say, okay, this is going to go in the right direction, just like in other industry that have digitized, they've all kind of migrated to one, two, or three, operating systems, if I could put them that way. Does this team see anything coming down the pipe that could push that, promote that?
I can start. I can offer just a couple of different pieces of what's going on, within the NREL world. So, for those of you on the audience who don't know NREL, it stands for National Renewable Energy Lab. It's about 4,000 people working on the clean energy transition, based mostly in Colorado. In there, we have a significant amount of commercial partners. So we probably work with 800 or 900 commercial partners to bring their software / technical and business solutions into our research and validation laboratories, but then to help improve those pieces. In that, there is a whole distributed energy management system platform, which is essentially, I'll call it a Switzerland of interoperability, where people can plug and play and bring software, hardware, control panels, et cetera, and work through DER, virtual power plant structures under different market constructs. We've got a huge simulation platform that you can deploy that in a given, I'll call it, location inside ERCOT or inside CAISO or inside PJM, because we've got simulations of those markets that run in 5-minute intervals on a big supercomputer and up in the cloud. But the components that are coming forward, which is what you asked about, there's hardware components, there's a huge amount of software components, and then there's a ton of control algorithms. A lot of those informed by super smart algorithms. Those are not necessarily centralized control and aggregation, but it's also this trend that we're seeing, which is, I'll call it, distributed hierarchical computing. So computing at the edge, for example, informed and coordinated through cybersecure communications that's another layer on top of it. All that is coming together in really positive technical solutions that then are that technical layer that are complemented by the business layer on top of it. We've done some of that. They're good examples with the Sacramento Municipal Utility. Again, I mentioned Holy Cross. There are a number of good examples in there. And then there's a whole set of algorithms, which is really about autonomous control, which is coming. I think that's a little bit toward even your business model, which is, how do you put out building level smart controls that can optimize the building and have it participate in the market, or aggregation among buildings to participate in markets at a bigger level. So an enormous landscape of innovation coming forward.
I think the way I'm approaching it is really to develop a technology that is really as flexible as possible, and not really geared towards solving a local problem, but really flexible enough to tackle every single issues or market designs or market construct. So that's the key. I mean, we cannot wait. The world cannot wait for a uniformity, and we need to accept the difference and basically create solutions to ride the wave of difference. And that's basically the approach that we've taken and the team has taken here at BrainBox, is to create a very flexible product to tackle those different designs, market designs, and challenges in each and every.
Yeah, just build on that. I think the echo Doug and Nicolas' point. I think the next wave of innovation is not going to be purely like technical innovation of technology. I think it's going to be in those advanced monitoring and control capabilities that allow us to essentially squeeze more juice out of this thing, right? So dispatch more, faster, quicker, do more service offerings, improve the business case for customers, all of which are things that are win-win-win. The utility gets the resource in a more cost-effective and efficient way. The customer ideally is able to squeeze in more money, more benefits, and improve their business case. The grid is able to meet more needs and more of the emerging constraint, or address more of the emerging constraints, whether again bulk system or down to distribution level.
There's just on this concept here of trying to get a platform that's accessible to many. There's questions coming in, so I'm going to throw one out there to the group. In the past years, we saw federal activities around the establishment of carbon taxes or carbon tax. Could a similar approach be used for flexibility by creating some kind of entity with good incentive structure in place, or some tools to propagate DER standardization? And I know it's a sensitive political topic.
I think those based on Montreal can better comment on how well the government is doing with its carbon taxing, but to take this in a more serious kind of tact, again, this comes down to, this is not going to make a dent. The utilities spend billions of dollars of infrastructure. This is going to be a couple of million. Again, where do you think we're going to focus our planning folks on? It comes down to really hard fundamental numbers. If you want to move the needle on this, you have to look at the fact that they spend billions of dollars on infrastructure. That's how they make their money. This is small potatoes. So we have to shift the dynamic around where the government can kind of come in, is, especially if they're looking at this, is helping, especially provincial and Canada, at least on the provincial side, energy is a provincial file, is actually helping evaluate and working with the provincial governments on better regulation, whether it is putting significant investment money and innovation money towards evaluating new regulatory frameworks to kind of enable that change. That could be one tact that they're doing. They are using the carbon tax to do a lot of innovation projects, but it's a bit of boys with toys approach. Let's put some technology in this space, let's play with a couple of things, but it has no implication for business as usual. And I challenge, look at all the money we spent in North America. DRs are not taking off. That should be this is not about money. This is fundamentally about how people make money. So if you change the way people make money, again, market forces are going to drive towards that. So I think that's where the government can really focus, is on the federal level specifically, putting together not incentives for DR uptake, but actually working with their provincial counterparts to kind of create frameworks to test out different models and see how they look out, see how they progress. If you want to create a Canada-specific or US-specific or New York-specific, we'll work on those counterparts, create those frameworks, put the right money towards it, and create a clear roadmap to business as usual. I'll say this: in Ontario, the OEB has a sandbox, and that's great in principle. But the question I asked OEB, and I say this honestly, is, okay, what happens after the sandbox? Do you have a pathway to business as usual? And the answer is no. Please put a rate application together and go in front of the adjudicators and get slammed. Not a very favorable position, guys. I'm just going to be honest here.
Yeah, and I mean, just to add to that, this is obviously a Canada-centric question, because you have carbon pricing in Canada, there's no federal carbon pricing in the US. So I think the big challenge here is that there is essentially no federal jurisdiction in Canada over electricity, right? So we don't have a FERC equivalent. We don't have any kind of federal levers beyond and I like the boys with toys framing that Ted used. So essentially throwing money at the problem is the only lever that's available at the federal level, unfortunately. So it really is a province by province play for the most part.
If I may add, and I think to get that message across, I'll put my professor hat on. I think there's a lot of public education of folks in industry, folks in government, everybody on the street, person on the street, and I think to go to Hisham's point, what costs a lot of money in the electricity industry? It's the wires, it's the stuff in the air, it's the stuff in the ground, and what we need to make people understand is that demand response is a direct substitute for that stuff. And people don't like to have the stuff in their backyard, don't like to have bigger substations. So, I think this call on social scientists to explain better that this whole thing that we're trying to deploy here is a way to save not just on carbon, but actually on natural resources and on labor and on everything that has to go out there. And again, as Hisham's saying, if my company makes money by building stuff, well, we're going to keep on building stuff. And if the alpha elector will say to their representatives, well, we need to do more demand response because we don't want to have more poles, then perhaps we will get the needle to move a little bit further down on the dial.
I think we're getting another question here, and I'm wondering if it's from one of our own here. But Doug, you also alluded to more advanced control systems that are has the role of bringing many assets together, but at the same time, the way those assets respond is one-to-one, right? A signal, I respond. 1,000 assets that are in a pool don't know, the asset number 500 doesn't know what asset number 734 is doing. We're entering a whole new world of adding capabilities around coordinating these on a grand scale, using AI. What challenges do you guys see? Sometimes we at BrainBox, we're sitting here and we're pushing the envelope of applying a novel technology to a sector that's not used to adopting novel technologies, and that's real estate. The same comment would be made for the energy sector. What can be done to bridge the gap? Because we do find like some of these capabilities solve a lot of those scale issues, right? Like when a customer has to get off their behind to go make the demand response happen, it's painful because that customer is not a demand response business. They have an entire other business that they manage day in and day out. We now have capabilities that can just make that role of signing up and being a participant much easier because it operates in the background given these new technologies. Is it just two worlds that are way too far apart at the moment and we need to solve 10 things before we get there? Or will it help deal with this?
Maybe there are a couple components that I see. One is customers want to see technologies that are commercially proven and have proof points. So that's the value of working with an NREL type experimental validation facility. I don't know if there's one in Canada that is similar, so that you can both put hardware/software on real assets and also simulation emulation. That gives folks confidence. You could actually do economic calculations based upon those as well. That's one. The second one is to really think about what does the business model look like for energy in the real estate market, or even for the B2C type, where C is actually residential customers, right? Most folks don't want to manage their energy. They want it smartly managed for them with a set of attributes that they care about: affordability, reliability, etc. Do they have flexibility in terms of whether or not the temperature swings a couple degrees? Absolutely. Would they do it themselves? It's proven that they're not so engaged to do it themselves, whether or not that's a thermostat. Do they really care if their water is hot at 2 a.m. in the morning? Not really, but they want it hot at 6 a.m. when they get up to take a shower. So a lot of options about how to do that and meet the customer requirements, and do that super smartly in the background.
but that's really a provision, a service provider in that middle, and that service provider might bring capital as well if needed. So that's the whole ESCO model. It's been around for decades. That's one solution. The other piece is just an add-on that goes in and does it smartly as well. So a couple quick responses. I know we're almost out of time.
Yeah. Any last comments before we start wrapping up?
I would just add, like, I would argue that I agree with Doug wholeheartedly, and I would argue that also applies to the commercial customers. So the facility manager that runs 100 warehouses couldn't care less about megawatts and NWAs and program procurements. They care about dollars, maybe the comfort of the people, maybe, and potentially emission reductions if they have some targets that they have to comply with. That's it. So everything that we just talked about in our basically sector intellect conversation doesn't matter to them. What they care about is dollars and cents and no impact to their operations and comfort and ideally some emission reduction. So I think that's going to be the winning vendors, the ones that can communicate that message and offer that value proposition in a way that achieves all those sector benefits that we want, but in a way that the customer actually understands and cares about.
Hicham, Francois, any last comments?
Well, I might add I'll look at the other side of the value chain on the power system operation and the planning. The operators in the control room have to start accepting that it's no longer just pushing a button. There's a little bit of uncertainty in whatever response you're going to get. So if you look in Denmark now, aggregators have to provide P90 values, so probably the 90% probability of exceedance that when you press the button, this is what you're going to get. So obviously there needs to be a bit more risk tolerance on the operation side, but hopefully with having large numbers of assets that you can play around, this is how you hedge. And I would hope that we will. I guess this is where folks like me come into the picture and looking forward into 20, 25 years, coming up with the crazy algorithms to manage that risk onto the second by second, if not moving forward in the next hours and onto days.
All right. Hicham, did you want to jump in? I saw you hesitate a second.
I was on mute. So no, I kind of add a positive note here. I think here at Electra, and I think see a lot within the Ontario market are looking towards building the capabilities. We're not waiting for the government or others to kind of say, here's what you need to do. We're kind of looking at, here's what we need to do from end to end to build a DSO to enable these capabilities, from planning to operations to control room to forecasting to market rules to customer programs as well. So even the culture of how you build programs and tie it to actual local needs and that economic layer. Talking about even testing it out. So we're looking at doing a lot of that work and taking a proactive role in this space. So hopefully in the next couple of years, you'll probably hear a lot on that from our end around this. And hopefully we can have a light, I would say, an example others can emulate in other jurisdictions within North America to kind of really allow this to kind of proliferate and for this to become a standard in North America for sure.
All right. Thank you for that. We're going to take this last sign off, take this occasion to thank our panelists here for making the time. I am going to do some very shameless promotion here. In preparation for this event, Doug mentioned that he's got a book out now. So Doug, remind us of the title of the book, please, and where it's available.
Wow, thanks. Our Renewable Energy Future. And it's the remarkable story of how renewables will become the basis of our lives. It's available on Amazon, Barnes & Noble, or World Scientific.
Cool.
Thank you.
All right. You heard it here. Thank you. Thank you again, everyone. Thank you for making the time.